So I wanted to talk quickly about something I call the 9/10ths philosophy. I have a few knives here. This is a zero tolerance 0301, scrapyard scrap max. Got Bussy Game Warden and the Spyderco Para 2 and M390. And so the 9/10ths broken philosophy. First, little backstory. So, in archery, actually, of all things, when you're building bows, the saying is that the best bows at full draw are 9/10ths broken. And it's true. Some of them actually are 10/10ths broken, and you'll be picking little bits out of your forehead. This isn't the point. So, the idea is that you want to go as close to the limit as you can without actually causing it to, without actually causing something, the bow, to break, and that's how you'll find maximum performance, because you want minimum limb mass, things like that. So why am I talking about archery and knives? Well, this is sort of a discussion I've been having about knives as of late, and as it pertains to Bussy and such. So, this Bussy Game Warden, there's relatively little you're going to do to it to break it. I mean, it's thick. It's 0.22 of an inch, so just shy of a 1/4 inch thick. It actually has the same thickness, about 0.7 of a millimeter, same thickness behind the edge bevel as this Para 2. And it's a good knife, but the thing about it is you don't see optimal cutting because of how thick the spine is, because the steel isn't as hard as some other steels, so you lose some edge retention, or some wear resistance, I should say, things like that. And so this sort of came to me as a philosophy when I was testing toughness on brass. I would cut into a piece of brass about a millimeter and twist out, and basically putting all the load laterally on just the tiniest little bit on the edge, and see what kind of damage I could do. And so doing that to a Bussy, you see you don't actually get any damage that's not reversible. You can go in and resharpen it, and you just get a little deformation at the side of the edge, a little dulling. Just go in, steal it, comes right back, right? So this is almost not broken at all. You're doing nothing to phase it. It's not breaking. This M390 Para 2 came with stock edge geometry. Do that. M390 relatively hard, relatively brittle. I do believe I read somewhere that it's more brittle than S90V, and that's why it is generally found to have slightly lower edge retention than that, because you chip away. But anyway, so do that with M390, twist, pull a little chip out of the edge, small chip. But so what I did was I went back in and I resharpened it, but I resharpened it and put this tiny little 45-degree apex bevel, micro bevel, on it. Went back, did the test again. Now, instead of pulling out a little chip, you get literally zero damage. There's no detectable damage. I can't find it under the scope. You can't feel it with your fingernail. No dulling, no problem. Won't catch paper if you cut through paper or anything like that. So, this knife is almost broken. It's 9/10ths broken when you do that. But as a result, you get the maximum performance out of it. Whereas this knife isn't even close to broken. It's very, very far from it. And so you get slightly reduced performance. And the same thing with cutting geometry in this way, rather than laterally loading the edge. You want the minimum thickness you can get away with for whatever tasks you're going to be doing to find the highest cutting performance. And so this is the counterexample of that. The M390's Para 2 is actually quite thick relative to this, geometry-wise. So this, given that the bevel is relatively thick, could hypothetically be chopped into something with a certain amount of force and endure it no problem, whereas this simply doesn't have the metal behind the edge at, I think it's what is it, 1/10 of a millimeter thick. I have the specs in one of the other videos. You can search up my review on that. This can withstand extremely little before it takes serious damage, relatively speaking. So again, you see the highest performance from this because it is the closest to, it is the thinnest, it is the most delicate, essentially. And so this is the game you play with knives, right? So the closer you are to causing the knife to fail at its maximum task, the better performance you'll get, full stop. So this goes for hardness versus toughness, and of course the thinness of the geometry and how high the edge angle is, because obviously the lower the apex angle, the worse cutting performance you'll get. So we can look at also something like this 0301. It's also relatively thick behind the edge bevel, and it's actually the thickest of these three, S30V. So I actually went in and increased the angle. You can see it's got quite a wide bevel on it now, and then just went back in and put a tiny little micro bevel on it, and now it can take the lateral force of cutting into the brass and twisting out, even though again it's a relatively high carbide volume steel, S30V. So this is the 9/10 philosophy. So it's something just to think about when you're picking your knife. You'll see better performance, full stop, from a knife that is as close as you are willing to go, basically 9/10 of the way to breaking, when doing the maximum abusive cutting task you would ever do with that knife. So something like this M390, people have said that you can break the tips on these by dropping them on the floor. If such a thing were to happen, I would certainly call BS and say that's a heat treat issue, because that should not happen. Even with a steel like this, you should see deformation before you see a serious fracture. But that's my thought on that. So if if you're going out then and batoning and chopping things and what have you, then this is going to be the best performance, because it's actually got the same geometry behind the edge as the Para 2. It's just thicker at the spine, and the infi is softer but higher toughness. So you'll be able to do quite a bit. If this isn't enough for you, you can get game wardens, amazingly, which are even fatter than this, both behind the bevel and at the spine, which won't cut as well as this, and they will be able to withstand more yet if, for example, you needed to do something more abusive than hammer your knife through car door hinges. But this, Para 2, you won't hammer through car door hinges, so you'll get better performance out of it for everything up to that. Same thing here. This won't pry, won't twist out very well, things like that, but you will get really exceptional cutting performance out of it. And again, L-Max is actually relatively high toughness and relatively soft for a knife of this geometry. You could very easily go to something a little more Phil Wilson-y, S90V, 10V, what have you, and get better performance yet, but you'd further reduce the toughness and the durability, so you'd be more likely to break it should you do something that's abusive. Also, I heard somewhere somebody was saying that cutting cardboard is too abusive on their knives. That's pretty laughable. In all seriousness, cardboard, although I will have to say, of all these knives, cardboard will do the most to harm this bussy out of this lot, because it's one of the softest. I think it is the softest. Yeah, it would be. It has the lowest carbide load, and so it just can't retain. It doesn't have the wear resistance to tolerate something that's predominantly extremely small particles. Of course, if you over-harden a blade and have particularly coarse cardboard, coarse particulate in your cardboard, you can actually get cardboard which will microfracture a high alloy steel. So just something to think about. I still like knives that you can use to to pry cars out of ditches or what have you, like Bussy. But I guess my sort of recent thing is I've started shifting away from doing the more abusive ends of things, like batoning my EDC, because I find that it's more convenient to carry a bigger belt knife. So I don't know. My opinions on what I want to do with my personal knife vary, and I'm always concerned that I'm not giving a consistent and factual narrative to my viewers regarding knives, because I have rather fickle taste in blades. But I guess at the end of the day, I like what I like. I still like all of my knives, even the ones that I'm not currently carrying. And so you just, what's the point of this? You want to match your blade to what you're planning on doing, I guess, or to what you would like to be able to do. Certainly, if I thought I was going to be randomly stranded in the woods, or I don't know, thrown out of an aircraft or something, the Bussy would be the easy choice. But if what I'm going to be doing is primarily cutting cardboard, maybe cutting a few copper conductors, tooling around the shop, whatever, this M390 Power 2 would give me the best performance. If I needed something folding, that would be quite tough. This is certainly about as tough as anything you're going to find that is broken in the middle. And this is actually the finest geometry slicer I have. I've wanted to get a Phil Wilson for a while now. I was sort of holding out for the Spyderco Phil Wilson, and then it came out, and I looked at the geometry and said, well, why on earth does this exist? This is pretty standard Spyderco geometry. This is not super thin behind the edge or anything else like that. It's not a super special knife. And so I passed on it, and I guess that was that. Which is not to say that the Spyderco Phil Wilson collaboration is a bad knife or anything like that. I guess I expected it to be a little more Phil Wilson-y, what can I say? But yes, so this is this discussion. I hope this was informative for some people. I hope people understand now what I mean by the 9/10 broken philosophy. Something like this. It's funny. Prior to talking to Cliff, I do want to thank Cliff for this, actually. Prior to talking to Cliff, I never would have thought to try using a knife like this to do something like cut through a copper conductor. I would have said, well, that's too abusive. You know, I believed in the mantra. I drank the Kool-Aid, and I bought the juice. So what I've been playing with recently and been quite pleased by is just playing with a steel that's high hardness and saying, okay, what sort of geometry do I need to apply to this bevel to get the performance I want out of it? And the answer is you put a primary bevel on it that's much higher angle, then you go down to the very edge where you'd sustain damage, and you bring that back a bit, so you have multi-geometry, so you get better slicing because the bevel has been thinned out. Cliff does these transition bevels, as he calls them, convex, because it allows you to twist the blade out of a substrate. I suppose I could do them a little more convex as well. I just haven't, because I like knowing the angles. It's much easier to tell what angle is affecting your performance if it is, in fact, a discrete angle. So, perhaps lower performance, but easier to measure. And so, you know, this is only 45 degrees inclusive at this edge, and the bevel itself is the final edge bevel, the apex bevel, the micro bevel, is less than a millimeter across, and it gives pretty astounding performance, in my opinion. So you learn something new every day, I guess. And so thank you, Cliff Stamp, and your forum, getting me to try some things that the common mantra is that's crazy. So yeah, 9/10 broken, M390. I like it, even though it is Smurf ivory, which is freaking ridiculously ugly.